Hello, church. As we jump into this next year, what are some of the things that you are prioritizing? What are the goals that you're making, resolutions that you have, or maybe expectations you're holding to? What are some changes from the previous years that you're looking to make this year? Whatever that is, can I make some suggestions to you about that? Here's a few things that I think need to be at the forefront of our mind if we're going to call ourselves followers of Jesus. If we bear the name Christian, these have to be at the forefront of our mind. What about the gospel? Are we considering all these goals, expectations, resolutions through the lens of the gospel? What about how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we relate to one another or invest in relationships, let alone how are we investing in our relationship with Jesus? Let's consider these things together in this new series that we're starting together called First Things First, getting our priorities straight. I know that suffering is not exactly a word that we like to use, but as Christians, we're told to expect it. And one of the things that we see Paul talking about quite frequently is his suffering for the gospel. And Peter even references this as well, that we are going to be suffering as Christians. Jesus warns us that if we are to follow him, that we will be persecuted, that we will be hated because of his name and his way of doing things. Why? Well, people don't like being told what to do. People don't like being told that their ways aren't the best ways. And so we continue to get stuck in our rhythms and our understandings and our interpretations. Even as Christians within ourselves, we get stuck in these things and we aren't willing to see that possibly, probably, likely there's a different way of doing it. And that the best way is Jesus' way. And so that's why the gospel is important, to learn what it means to submit to this gospel, to submit to the rule and reign of Jesus as Lord. But with that, we're told that we should expect some suffering to accompany it. And we know this just because, well, we already know that within ourselves, people conflict with our opinions and views of things. Each of us know that we've come head to head with one another, or whether you're a believer or non-believer. And so our views kind of don't always gel together. Well, our views don't always gel together with God's views either. And so for those of us living in obedience to the gospel, for those of us following in the ways of Jesus and repenting of our ways and turning to his and submitting ourselves to what his rule and reign tells us to live in, well, that's going to clash with the world. And as a result, we're going to suffer. And I don't think we truly understand what that means. And I think that sometimes we attribute suffering for the sake of the gospel to things that aren't necessarily of the gospel. For example, we will sometimes tag on our own agendas along with the gospel and throw Jesus' name on top of it. And when people kind of bunt heads with us on our views on things, we say, oh, well, they're just upset with me because I'm a Christian, or they're upset with me because I have a greater understanding of God than they do. And we kind of start attributing our suffering to justify our own ideas, our own interpretations, rather than stopping and submitting those understandings and interpretations to God. Now, I'm not saying that we just aren't believers in all of these things. I'm just saying that sometimes we don't stop and really consider, is this me or is this God? Am I trying to get in God's way here of what his rule and reign really is and just attributing it to him, when really I haven't stopped to think about, maybe this is me getting in God's way? And so we attribute our suffering wrongly to the fact that, well, this is because I'm a Christian, when really it's because you're human, and we can get in God's way of what it really means to live out the gospel. So all I'm challenging us to do is, hey, we're going to suffer. Let's really understand that we are going to suffer, but let's suffer for the right reasons. Let's suffer because we loved too much. Let's suffer for the sake of the gospel because we were encouraging people to follow God's way and not our way or their way, but to truly surrender to his way. And that means to follow in the same way that Jesus suffered. See, Jesus continued to proclaim his rule and reign, but he was so submissive in that to the point of death on a cross. He didn't try to stomp his feet and prove that he was the Son of God, that he was the Messiah, that he was the rightful king. He simply just lived in the integrity that this is who I am, and was able to die and know that, hey, my integrity still stands because I know who I am. Can we do the same thing? Are we willing to do the same thing where instead of stomping our feet and trying to prove our points, even if we can attribute it to the gospel, are we willing to suffer in the right ways and for the right reasons? For example, I always say that, we can speak all of God's truth, but if we don't speak God's truth in God's love, it's worthless. There's absolutely no point in us opening our mouths. And sometimes I think our suffering is self-inflicted and not gospel-inflicted. So let's just know that, hey, there's going to be conflict. Any tension of telling people that their ways maybe aren't the best ways, and even telling ourselves our ways aren't the best ways, that's going to cause some suffering and some conflict. But let's do it for the right reasons. Let's not do it just to prove a point, and let's not do it just to make ourselves feel better about our interpretations of things, but that we're truly submitting to the rule and reign of Jesus and suffering for the right reasons, which is that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. That his ways are better than ours, that the rule and reign of God is here, and that means that his ways are good, and my ways, not so much. I need him. And so let's suffer for the right reasons. This is what suffering for the gospel really means.